Hello friends, it's Lisa, and today I'm going to be chatting with you all about the 8 books that I read in the month of April. I feel like April was a relatively good reading month for me, and I'm happy that I was able to read 8 things. I was feeling a bit slumpy, I feel like, towards the end of the month, so I'm happy that I was able to read that many things. Also, I was vlogging throughout the entire month of April, and I also did some other vlogs as well, some other reading vlogs, so literally every book that I read this month has a vlog for it. So if you want to know more of my in-depth thoughts, or also just the ones that I read at the beginning of the month where my thoughts are going to definitely be more fresh in those vlogs, I'll have those vlogs linked below if you want to check them out. But without further ado, let's just get into the wrap up. Alright, so the first book that I managed to finish this month was Morningstar by Pierce Brown. This is the 3rd book in the Red Rising series, and I've kind of been making my way through this series at the beginning of this year. So if you've been watching any of my vlogs or wrap-ups throughout the whole year, you've probably heard me describe this series many times now at this point, but I am going to do it again. So this book you're following Darrow, and he is a red. And the kind of caste system and the society is based off of different colors, and reds are at the very bottom. So Darrow, along with many other reds for years and years, have been mining under the surface of Mars to eventually make it habitable for future generations. Darrow ends up finding out that the surface of Mars has been habitable for many years, and basically the reds are just being used to kind of provide for the other colors and the other people living on the surface. So because these lies that the golds, who are at the top of this caste system, have been telling to the reds and to Darrow, and something that they actually take away from Darrow at the beginning of the book, he ends up getting kind of sucked into this rebellion against the golds, and he ends up being transformed to look like a gold so that he can infiltrate their academy and get to know more about them and be able to kind of rebel against them from the inside. And it's definitely a very interesting series. I think the politics within the series has been very interesting to follow. And I will say this is the first book in the series so far where I have actually felt invested in the characters. I feel like the first 2 books, it took me so long to keep track of who was who. There's so many characters in this series, and I feel like book 3, I actually went into it knowing who everyone was, and I was feeling so much more invested, and I think that's why I end up enjoying this one the most out of the first 3 books in the series. I gave this one 4.5 stars, so I really did enjoy it. I feel like Pierce Brown, the way he's able to write so many plot twists and shocking moments, and there's just so many things that I never see coming, and you would think maybe by book 3 I would start to pick up on what he's doing, but no, I was surprised by every twist and turn, and that makes it such a fun reading experience. And because this was the one where I was finally invested in the characters, I actually felt affected by some of these twists and turns. I think the biggest thing with the characters is that this whole series so far has been from Darrow's perspective. You are in his head the whole series, and it's not fun. The first 2 books, it's kind of rough being in his head all the time, but I feel like this book he finally started to reflect on the way he did things in the first 2 books and the way he acted, and I feel like it was nice to see a little bit of growth with him there, and I feel like because of that it made me actually like him a little bit more as a main character and made me actually want to root for him. And I guess I was rooting for him, of course, in the first 2 books, but I feel like this book it was a lot easier to root for him and made me more invested in what was happening to him and the people around him. But other than the characters and finally feeling invested in both Darrow and just all of the side characters, I feel like this one was action-packed from start to finish. I think I read over half the book in one day just because I could not put it down and I needed to know what was going to happen. The extent of how wild part 4 is of Golden Sun, the 2nd book in this series, and how invested I felt in just that particular part of the book, that's how I felt this entire book. So it was definitely a big improvement for me, definitely my favorite in the original trilogy. I think the only reason I didn't give this full 5 stars is just because sometimes the writing with the battle scenes or the fight scenes was sometimes hard for me to follow. I couldn't always visualize what was going on or where we were, and so that made it a little bit difficult for me to get invested in those moments because I had a hard time picturing it. But once I realized kind of what was going on and where we were, I was a little bit more into it and was easier to follow. But I feel like a lot of times the start of some of those scenes I would be a little lost, so that was my one kind of issue. But I really enjoyed this book in the series, and I think at this point I do want to continue on with the rest of the books. I think this is going to be a 7-book series. The 6th one I think is coming out this summer, so I do think I want to continue on. I'm definitely interested in picking up the rest of the books, and yeah, I'm just happy I finally read a book in this series and actually felt like I understood why everyone loved the series so much. I actually really enjoyed this one. So the next book I ended up picking up in the month of April was On the Come Up by Angie Thomas, and I was so excited to finally pick this up. I have been wanting to read this since it came out in 2019, I think. It's been on my TBR for a while. I've just been staring at it and not picking it up. So I finally did this month, and I'm happy to report it was worth the wait. I really enjoyed this. So in this book, you're following Bree, who really wants to be a rapper. That is her ultimate dream. Her father was actually a pretty well-known, like legendary hip-hop artist. So she kind of has those big shoes to fill, but also a lot of people are constantly like comparing her to him. So she really wants to make her rap career her own and show people that she is capable completely on her own. And so she ends up recording this song that ends up going viral. And, you know, for a while it's really exciting. She's getting this success, but at the same time, it's causing a lot of like controversy in the news, and a lot of people go digging into her personal life and start using things that she's done and said against her and completely take things out of context. So she's finding herself in the center of this controversy because of this song, but this is her dream. So she really wants to continue to pursue it and continue to make this career work, especially because her family is financially not in the best situation. And so if she's able to make this career work, this rap career work, she'll be able to provide for her family. Like I said, I really did enjoy this. I also give this 4.5 stars. Something that I love about this book, as well as every Angie Thomas book, is her writing. The way she's always able to just like hook me in the first like couple of chapters of her books. It happens every time, and I don't know how she does it. I just like always instantly feel so connected to the characters and just really enjoy her writing style. She also tends to write very character-driven books, which does tend to be my preference, but I really love Bree. I love the relationships that she has in this as well, like the relationships with her family and her friends and how that plays a role in her life. And I just really enjoyed seeing that. I love the way Angie Thomas explores these different relationships. There's also even a little bit of a romance, a teeny tiny romance between Bree and another character that I really enjoyed. It's definitely not like a huge part of the book by any means. There's really only like a few scenes with them, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really cute and was very fun to read about. But I did give this 4.5 stars, not quite a 5. And I think one of the things that I kind of had a problem with was the pacing. It takes about 200 pages for Bree's song to go viral, which is like the starting point of basically all of the conflict and issues within this book, and kind of is what the main focus and plot point of this story is. And it takes a while to get into that, and I didn't necessarily mind that because I did enjoy the setup of the story and getting to know Bree as a character and all of the people around her and really get to understand her situation. But I do feel like the ending of this book was a little rushed, and the kind of resolution to things just happened a bit too quickly. So I think there was just like a little bit of an imbalance between the setup and the kind of resolution in this book. And with the ending and like the resolution to all of these problems being very quick and happening a little too fast, I did feel like there wasn't enough time for Bree to really reflect on a lot of the decisions she made in this book, because that was one thing that kind of started to irritate me. And I want to explain, like, I do get why Bree made the decisions that she did throughout this book. She makes a lot of decisions because she wants this rap career to work out. She desperately wants it to work because it's her dream, and also to help out her family in this financial situation that they're in. So she makes a lot of these decisions that maybe she even knows aren't the best idea, but she's kind of desperate for this to work. So she makes a lot of decisions that kind of put her in not great situations, and it just continues to happen throughout the book. And of course I understand why she was making those decisions. Not only was she trying to help her family and make this dream work, but she's also a 16-year-old girl, and let me tell you, teenagers, they don't always make the best decisions. So I totally understand why she's making these decisions. It just does happen quite a bit, and literally every character, every person in Bree's life kind of gives her the advice to not do certain decisions. Not even just the adults in the situation like her mom and her aunt, but her brother and her friends who are also teenagers try to give her this advice to not do certain things, and she just doesn't listen. And I feel like the ending, we should have had more of a moment for Bree to kind of reflect on those decisions and reflect on how that affected herself and the people around her. And I don't know, I just wish that there was a little bit more of a reflection on that. Again, understand why she made the decisions she did. I just felt like it was kind of frustrating to continuously watch her make these poor decisions, but then also not have her reflect on that at all at the end. So I wish we had seen a little bit more of that, but I still really enjoyed it. Obviously, I gave it 4.5 stars. Really enjoyed it. Very happy that I did enjoy it after all this time of waiting to read it. Next up, in the month of April, I ended up picking up the first of 3 historical romances. I did a whole vlog dedicated to reading historical romances, so I'm gonna have that linked below because I go in way more in depth on my thoughts than I probably will in this wrap up. But the first one I ended up reading was Coldhearted Drake by Lisa Kleypas. So in this book, you're following Devin and Kathleen, and Devin has just inherited this earldom. He inherited this because his cousin tragically passed away, and now Devin has all of these responsibilities and things that he has to manage that he doesn't really want and never really wanted at the estate that he's now inherited. Kathleen, who was his cousin's wife, she's now a widow. She is still living at this estate along with the cousin's like 3 sisters. So not only does Devin now have all of these new responsibilities, he also has these 4 women living in this house that he is responsible for. And Kathleen is very wary of Devin because of his reputation and because she, like, within the first meeting that she had with him, it was not a good start. They did not get off on the right foot. She is learning that he wants to like sell the estate and sell all of these things, and that will leave her and these other girls with no home. So they don't get off on the right start, but eventually they do start to realize their feelings for one another, and this was really just not great. I end up giving this 2 stars. I just really didn't enjoy this. I feel like this was not the best place to start with Lisa Kleypas. I know she's a very popular author. A lot of people really love her books, and I feel like even fans of her books don't like this series or don't like this book, so maybe that was my bad. Honestly, the first half of this book was fine. It wasn't great, but I was having an okay time. But I do feel like the second half, a lot of my problems with it became very apparent. Kathleen and Devin just did not communicate with each other well. They didn't listen to each other well. And that was just like all the time, but especially it bothered me in the more spicier scenes. We would have Kathleen telling Devin, stop, or no, and he just wouldn't listen. And I think the way that these scenes are supposed to be read and interpreted is that she doesn't actually mean it. She's just kind of like overwhelmed. But one, you could have expressed that a different way, and it was just really like uncomfortable to read someone telling another person to stop and them just not listening. I feel like that just is not putting out the best message. Like, oh, she said no, but you didn't really mean it. You know, just not the best vibe. So that was just uncomfortable to read, and I just didn't enjoy it. And the fact that they weren't able to communicate with each other about literally anything made them just very frustrating to read about. And then the whole like last third of this book, we have Kathleen and Devin who are mad at each other because they once again didn't communicate well with one another. And then so much of the last third of this book doesn't even focus on them. It focuses on these side characters that are going to be the main characters in book 2. This is the first book in a series, and I do think it's fun when you have these like companion series where you get introduced to characters, you maybe get a little taste of what their relationship's gonna be, and then you see it actually happen and develop in another book. But so much of the last bit of this book focused on these side characters and their relationship that I felt like I was already reading their book, and it was just weird to me that Kathleen and Devin, who were the main characters of this book, got pushed to the side for these other characters. Because Kathleen and Devin, they needed the page time. They were a complete mess and needed to learn how to communicate with one another, and it made their conclusion to their story and their happily ever after just very unsatisfying, because it felt like that conversation where they made up was very rushed, and it just didn't feel believable. Like, I didn't believe that they wouldn't be fighting in 5 pages from now, like off screen, you know? Like, it just didn't make sense. So yeah, the lack of communication, the weird focus on these other side characters instead of the main characters of this book, and just a very like unsatisfying ending made this not really work for me. So 2 stars, but definitely want to check out Lisa Kleypas' other books by her, because I think that this was just not the place to start. So next up, I ended up reading Ironheart by Nina Varela. This is the sequel to Crier's War, which I actually originally read back in like 2020 and then did a reread of this past March. So I finally read the sequel, finally finished this duology, and I'm very happy about that. So in this duology, you're following Crier and Ayla. And Ayla is a human who is rebelling against the Autome. The Autome are these like human-like creatures that were created because a queen long ago was unable to have children. So she tasked people with creating her a child. And now the Autome are the ones that are in charge. They are the ones ruling over the humans. They are in control. So Crier is the princess. She is the daughter to the king. She is an Autome. And we have Ayla, who is determined to actually kill Crier. Ayla wants to get this revenge because the king is responsible for killing Ayla's family, so her plan is to kill Crier, but then the 2 of them end up crossing paths, and Ayla, instead of killing Crier, realizes that they might actually have some similar goals and might be able to work together. And I really enjoyed this duology as a whole. This one I gave 4 stars, so definitely didn't love it as much as the first book in the series, but I still did enjoy it. I think, again, the pacing was a bit off for me with this one. I feel like the first like half of this book was very, very slow. I do think this duology as a whole is not the most like action-packed type of series, but the first half of this book was a lot of characters just talking and planning And, you know, that's fun to an extent, but it was too much. But once we got to that second half, I did really enjoy it, and I enjoyed where the story went from that point. And I do really like a lot of the decisions that Nina Varela made with this series, a lot of the answers to the questions we had, a lot of the like twists and turns that we had in this book as well were really interesting. There was one reveal that happened that I maybe should have seen coming, but didn't at all. And it was so surprising, and that just made it like so interesting to see where things were gonna go. And just a lot of the decisions, like I was saying, like some of the questions I had and some of the explanations for things were just very satisfying. So this was a very satisfying conclusion. I don't know, did I say I gave this 4 stars? I think I did. Even though I do feel like there were moments that were a bit slow, and I do feel like there were some things at the end that happened a little too quickly and maybe just like weren't 100% satisfying because they happened so fast. I do feel like overall this was a satisfying conclusion to the series, and I'm just happy I finally finished the series. I really did enjoy this. I really love Crier and Ayla. I love their relationship, and I just think there's a lot of really great lessons and quotes in this book as well. The writing is really beautiful. So yeah, overall 4 stars, had a great time, and happy I finally finished the series. The next book I read in the month of April was another historical romance, which was A Lady for a Duke by Alexis Hall, and I loved this so much. You're following Viola, who is a trans woman, and so when she is presumed dead at Waterloo, she takes that as an opportunity to live as herself. The only people who know that she is who she is her brother and her brother's wife, but being able to have this freedom and live as her true self, she also has kind of lost a lot of things. Viola has lost her title and her wealth and her estates, and also has lost her best friend Justin. But Justin and his family, as well as Viola and her family, they end up reconnecting. So Viola travels to Justin's estates and ends up seeing him for the first time since this war, and Viola sees just how much the loss of Justin's friend has affected him and how much grief has overtaken him. And now Viola is trying to help Justin through this loss, but she is the friend that he lost. So it's kind of this difficult situation, but I loved this so much. I loved Justin and Viola. I loved their relationship, not even just like the romantic side of it, because that was swoony and beautiful and wonderful and had me very emotional and like kicking my feet and squealing and just having the best time, but their actual like friendship as well, and this bond that they had and how well they knew each other was just so beautiful to see. So I really loved Viola and Justin and their relationship and how it changed and evolved throughout this book. I really loved the side characters. I thought they were so much fun to follow. It was really funny. There were so many funny moments as well. The writing was just really beautiful. There were a lot of beautiful quotes. I was tabbing this book because of just so many moments with the quotes and funny moments, beautiful moments, emotional moments. I just had to get the tabs out. This definitely had its emotional scenes. I was teary-eyed at various points throughout this book, but I just thought it was so beautiful and so great to read about a trans woman finding love, and that not being, you know, her being trans was not the center of the conflict. I think Alexis Hall said that he wanted to create a book where the main character was trans, but that was not the focus of the conflict. And I really love that. I love that Viola was able to just be herself. You know, gender and gender roles in society, like, obviously play a role in a historical romance. That is a part of the book. And Viola being trans is obviously a part of her identity, but it's not the conflict of the book, and like all of the other characters are very like accepting of her, and it's just really nice to see a trans woman as the main character of this book get her happily ever after, and it was just really good. I did give this 4.5 stars though. I think it's honestly probably more of a 4.75 if we want to get really specific, because the only thing that kept it from being a perfect 5-star for me was the fact that the middle kind of dragged a bit. That kind of will they won't they get together time where they were clearly interested in each other, but for certain reasons they were fighting against these feelings and weren't really ready to be in this relationship. That kind of aspect of the book seemed to just last a little bit too long for me, and it kind of felt like they were having good conversations, but a lot of the same conversations over and over again in that middle part of the book. But honestly, other than that, I thought this was so great. I loved the relationship, like I've said a million times. I love Justin and Viola so much, and I also love that the kind of third act conflict in the book isn't a third act breakup. The actual conflict itself is a little ridiculous, but kind of in the most like fun and entertaining way. Like, I enjoyed it. I loved how ridiculous it was, and I loved that it wasn't like a third act breakup kind of situation. This was just so good, and I want more people to read it. I thought it was incredible. I loved it so much, and definitely something that I can see myself rereading in the future, potentially just giving it a 5-star in the future upon a reread. And Alexis Hall, if you're listening, please write a book about Miranda. Thank you so much. So after finishing A Lady for a Duke, I ended up picking up another romance, but more of a contemporary romance. I picked up The Right Move by Liz Tomford, and this is the second book in the Windy City series. I read Mile High, I think back in February, and enjoyed it, so I wanted to continue on with the series. Unfortunately, I have the unpopular opinion of liking this one less than Mile High. So in The Right Move, you're following Indy and Ryan. Indy is a flight attendant for a hockey team. She flies the plane that brings a certain hockey team to and from their away games. And then we have Ryan, who is a professional basketball player. And the two of them end up kind of knowing of each other because of Stevie. She is the main character from the first book, and she is also Ryan's sister and Indy's best friend. So when Indy is in need of a place to stay because she has recently broken up with her ex and doesn't have the money to afford her own place, Stevie kind of orchestrates them becoming roommates and Indy moving in with Ryan, and they're very against it at first, but they do end up agreeing. So the two of them are kind of these reluctant roommates. They don't necessarily get along super great at the beginning of everything, but they end up kind of needing each other when Ryan's general manager of the basketball team is doubting Ryan's capability of being a good captain. He is the captain of this team, but because Ryan doesn't really trust a lot of people, he really only talks to his teammates and his sister. And because of his lack of trusting people, that gets brought up, and the fact that he doesn't really date people and isn't in any relationships, like that is kind of some of the reasoning behind the general manager's thought process of him not maybe being the best captain. And Ryan decides to lie and say, actually, I do in fact have a girlfriend. I'm fit to be a captain. So then him and Indy end up making this deal that Indy will be his fake girlfriend to certain events with the team and pretend to be his girlfriend so that the general manager will think he is opening up and trusting of people and be able to be a good captain. And Ryan agrees to be Indy's date to a wedding. Indy is in this wedding that is with this friend group that she has that her ex is also a part of. So her ex is going to be at the wedding, and so she doesn't want to show up without a date. So Ryan agrees if she agrees to be his fake girlfriend. So there were definitely parts of this book that I did enjoy. I really enjoyed the fake dating aspect. I wish there was more of it, but that's just a personal preference because I just love the fake dating trope. But I thought the scenes that we did get with that were really fun. I also really enjoyed the fact that they were roommates and how that influenced the building and foundation of their relationship. You really get to know someone when you live with them, and so it's really interesting to see the things that they start learning about each other by living with one another, and it was really sweet the things that they start doing for each other because of that. And I was saying this kind of in the vlog where I read this book, that this gave me more so what I wanted from like the roommates aspect of this story. It gave me more of what I wanted from the American Roommate Experiment. I feel like that book, them being roommates, was supposed to be a big part of it, but it really wasn't. And I feel like this book, we saw them actually like being roommates. A lot of the times, a lot of the scenes in this book are set in the apartment with them together, and you see them getting to know each other through living together. And I just really liked that that was like the foundation of their relationship and how they got to know one another. It was just really fun to see them living together and like the tension that would begin to rise with them and the angst and the complicated feelings, especially when you have fake dating thrown in, because it's like, are these feelings fake? We're alone in this apartment, but is this fake? It was really fun. So I really loved the roommates aspect, the fake dating aspect. I did like these characters. I just feel like the kind of conflict of this book is where some of my issues came from. I also, before we get into that, do want to say like the writing is not my favorite. These books are both kind of cheesy, but in a cringy way. Like, I don't know. I love cheesy things. I love some cheesy books and some cheesy rom-coms. I kind of eat it up, but I feel like this was cheesy in a cringy way. And I definitely feel like Mile High kind of had that similar vibe, but it was less noticeable. I think because I just maybe liked the characters and more of the plot with that one than I did with this one. It just like the cringy moments and things with the relationship and the characters that just didn't feel natural. Like, do real people actually talk like this? I don't know. It just was more noticeable, and the writing just was not my favorite. But kind of going back to the conflict of this book, I feel like it gets initiated when Ryan kind of opens up to Indy about why he doesn't trust people and why he doesn't get into relationships. Indy doesn't treat him poorly necessarily. It's more so like her inner monologue after that moment where you realize she's thinking more about how that is going to affect their relationship instead of just being sympathetic towards Ryan and what he experienced. She is sympathetic, and there definitely are moments after that initial reaction where she shows sympathy, and it's definitely not just about her in that moment, but her first initial reaction is like, okay, but like, does that affect how he thinks about me? And it's like, girly, that's not, he's explaining his trauma to you. Let's not focus on you for just 1 minute. Also, like, the actual reason behind Ryan, like not trusting people and the story he tells Indy and like what happened to him in his past that made him this way without like saying what it actually is. It's just a little out there. It's a little like bad fanfic kind of vibes. It's like a little unbelievable. Like I'm sure that situation does happen, I guess, but it's a little unbelievable, a little out there. And I'm specifying bad fan fiction because I think you all know what I mean when I say that, because there's a lot of really great fan fiction out there, but there are certain ones that you read and you're kind of reading these plot points and you're like, what's happening right now? It's kind of like that. So yeah, overall, like it was fine. I enjoyed it while I was reading it. I definitely feel like my interest and my enjoyment of this book was a lot higher at the beginning. Like I was definitely really enjoying it in the first bit of the book, and then slowly throughout the book, my enjoyment and interest just kind of lowered and I became less and less excited to pick the book up. It was fine. I don't know if I'm going to continue on with the series. I don't know if I said what I rated this. I gave it 3 stars. But yeah, I don't know if I'm going to continue on with the series just because like I feel like the writing just not being my favorite and being a little cringy to me is like my biggest problem, and you know, her writing is probably going to stay relatively consistent throughout the series. I think there's going to be at least 4 books. There's a 3rd one coming out later this year. I'm going to see how I feel, but honestly there are so many other romance books that I want to read that I don't know if I'm planning on continuing on with the series. We'll just have to see. But yeah, this wasn't necessarily a favorite. Gave it 3 stars, thought it was fine, and I'm definitely like in the minority. So if you're looking forward to reading this book, take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, because there are so many 4 and 5 star reviews of this book. I don't know what's wrong with me. And that being like one of the last books I read throughout the month, I have the next 2 books that were the last things I read. It's starting to make sense why I was feeling a bit slumpy at the end of the month. So the next book I read was The Hellions Vault by Olivia Waite. This is the 3rd book in the Feminine Pursuits historical romance series. This is also featured in that historical romance vlog, which I'm definitely gonna link below, because even though this was the second to last thing that I read in the month of April, I already forgot so much of it. I literally had to look up what the characters' names were. So I definitely recommend watching that vlog. But I know now that you're following Sophie and Maddie, and Sophie and her family have recently moved to Carrisford to get this fresh start. They lost their music shop due to this con man that like took advantage of them, so they moved there to get a fresh start. Sophie is very like reluctant of this new place. She is very like not trusting of it. She kind of sees this girl Maddie and thinks like she is trying to do something to somebody like what this man did to my family, and she would be right. However, once she learns what Maddie's kind of up to and this plan that she has, she kind of changes her mind. Maddie is trying to plan this heist against this guy who is really, really rich, takes advantage of people, doesn't pay people fairly. So Maddie is trying to swindle him into giving them money to fund the Weavers Union so that they can have fair wages and better like working conditions in the factories that they work in. And so that is kind of her plan for this heist. And once Sophie kind of learns this plan, she also gets involved. And then it's just this romance between the 2 of them as they plan this heist. And it was fine. I thought the romance was cute. It definitely was very insta-lovey, which I feel like is not always my favorite. I think it can be done well, but I feel like in this instance, it just didn't necessarily work for me. The relationship does progress very quickly. Maddie basically learns Sophie's name the second time they meet, and the second time they meet, they make out. And then the 3rd time they're together, Maddie's like, oh, I want to know everything about Sophie. And it's like, girl, you literally just learned her name the last time you met each other. Like, it was just a little too fast for me. But once we got into the book, I did start to get more invested in their relationship. It just took me a while to catch up to where they were because it happened so fast. But the kind of like heist part of this plot was fun. It wasn't like, I don't know, like we're not talking like Sex with Crows level heist, but it was fun. It was a good time. And I like the way that that all concluded. I also really enjoy that this is a historical romance about a sapphic relationship. There's also a few other like side characters and relationships that happen that are sapphic, and there's a polyamorous relationship, and I just love that that's so accepted with all of these characters and those things aren't, again, the center of the conflict. I also like that there isn't a 3rd act breakup. I feel like so often with romances, the 3rd act conflict is centered around a breakup, and I feel like it's really refreshing to read a romance every once in a while where there isn't a 3rd act breakup and the conflict comes from other things. So yeah, overall it was fine. I gave this 3 stars. I don't know. I feel like that maybe is generous, but at the same time, like I don't think this was as bad as Coldhearted Drake, so like giving it a 2 feels too low. Yeah, it was fine. I'm happy to have finished the series as well. This was the final book in this series, so another series checked off. But yeah, it was fine, and it was fun to read a historical romance that focuses on a sapphic relationship, but I do feel like the first book in the series, The Lady's Guide to Celestial Mechanics, is actually the best one and my favorite one out of the series. And finally, the last book that I read in the month of April is The Red Squirrels of Magic by Cassandra Clare and Leslie Chu, and again, gave this 3 stars. My last few reads of the month being 3 stars and me feeling slumpy. Not the best combination. But this is the first book in the Eldest Curses series where you focus on Magnus and Alec. They are like the main characters in the series. And this first book in the series, timeline-wise, goes back to the Mortal Instruments series. We kind of get plopped right back into the middle of that series. And I want to say it's City of Fallen Angels, but I could be wrong. Magnus and Alec return from this vacation, and this book is that vacation. You're following them on this vacation, but of course it's not just them lounging around and having a good time. Of course there's things that get in the way. You actually find out that Magnus may or may not have accidentally founded a cult that is now very real and causing a lot of problems. So Magnus and Alec are kind of tasked with figuring out who is the actual leader of this cult, what's going on, and why they're doing the things they're doing, what are their motivations. So it's not just a fun, silly, goofy vacation for them. They actually have a lot of things that they got to figure out. So I think it's fine. Like I said, I gave it 3 stars. I love Magnus and Alec so much. I love their relationship, and I actually feel like, I don't know if this is just like the romance girly in me, but I wish that this book focused more on like Magnus and Alec and their relationship, because this is like pretty early on in their relationship, and it's really cute to see them like starting to learn things about each other and these feelings that they're having for each other just really starting. But already you can tell how much they love each other, and there were so many like beautiful and cute quotes that were about their relationship, and just like the way they viewed each other and thought about each other was so cute. And I just wish that more of this book focused on their relationship and their vacation and like the more like fun, silly romantic moments. Basically, I wish there was less of a plot. I just feel like the overall plot of this book is just a little underwhelming. Like, it's interesting, but I think because this book is going like back in time, just the way that they have to explain certain things and why characters never mentioned this before or after the events, and like the way it has to make sense with the other series, it just, I don't know, sometimes it works. Like, I think they did a good job in some aspects explaining why characters don't mention this, but there were other things that I thought it was a little forced, or just it didn't necessarily work. Like, there are certain characters that show up in this book and they're like, why don't we just forget that this ever happened, and then the next time we see each other we'll pretend like it's the first time we're meeting. So then that explains why they act like they're meeting for the first time in the Mortal Instruments series. So it's just like, I don't know, stuff like that. It's like, okay, that's a little bit of a silly explanation, but like, I guess I'll go with it. So yeah, this book just kind of gives me like fan fiction vibes, which isn't necessarily bad, but it also kind of reminds me of like when you're reading a book and there's this overarching plot and this goal that you have. To get to that point, there's a lot of other side quests that these characters go on and other things that they have to do to get to that point. This book feels like just one of those side quests. It feels like you're reading a whole book about one of those mini side quests. I just don't love it. I think because of that, I don't know, it doesn't do a whole lot for me. The plot is just a little underwhelming. I also think another thing that kind of throws me off with this book is that it is co-written with Wesley Chu. And, you know, when you have read so many Shadowhunter books and you've reread them so many times, even before the Shadowhunters read along, which is why I reread this book this month anyway. This was our April pick. I was rereading it for that, but even before the read along, like I was rereading these books and reading these books all the time. You start to get to know Cassandra Clare's writing style and her humor and her dialogue. When it becomes that familiar, when you have something that like is close but not quite the same, it can kind of throw you out of the story. This has nothing against Wesley Chu. I would love to actually read something that they have written that is completely their own and actually see their writing style, because I feel like I would enjoy it. I think it's just when it's characters that I already know so well, and when like the funny moments, like the banter, the comedy, and just like the dialogue with these characters is so different. It's just like, I don't know, it kind of throws you off, and it's like, do these characters really act like this? I don't know, and that kind of feeds into the fanfic vibes. So yeah, this definitely isn't a favorite of mine. I don't hate it, but I don't love it either. I definitely don't think I would have ever reread this book if it wasn't for the Shadowhunters read along, but at the same time, I am glad to have reread it because now I actually remember what this book is about. I completely forgot that the whole plot of this book was the whole cult thing. I just remembered that it was Magnus and Alec, and that was it. So now I'm glad that I know what it's about, especially if these types of things end up coming up in books later in like the Wicked Power series or anything. So I'm happy to have reread it, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's my favorite book in the Shadowhunter world. I definitely don't love it, but I don't think it's as bad as everyone says it is. So yeah, 3 stars, had a good time, but definitely not my favorite Shadowhunter book. But that is it. Those are all 8 books that I read in the month of April. Again, like I was saying, I did vlog reading every single one of these books. So if you feel like you didn't get a very good description, or my thoughts weren't that great, I would definitely recommend checking out those vlogs because I'm sure I was a little bit more concise and all of it was fresh in my head in those vlogs. So I will have all of them linked below. But I would love to know if you've read any of these books or how your month went reading wise. Were there any standouts? I would just love to know how your reading month went. But I think that that is going to be it for my April wrap up. So thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. Bye.